We disown you, no ties ever. Stop contacting us. That was the text I received delivered with surgical cruelty, just as I was about to be honored at a major Chicago charity gala, only for me to reply, "Fine repossessing the 4 villas I bought for you worth $6.2 million, which sent my smug, treacherous family into a frenzy of panicked begging. The immediate aftermath was chaos, a beautiful, devastating explosion of entitlement meeting reality. My mother, Sarah, usually the picture of serene upper-middle-class dignity, she worked so hard to maintain the kind of woman who wore designer clothes, but insisted on shopping at Target for the humility, visibly crumpled her hand, flying instinctively to the antique pearl necklace I'd bought her, the same hand that had just typed those venomous words moments before. My father, James, a man whose entire personality was built on controlled superiority. The silent, judging patriarch stared at his phone, the air leaving his lungs in a silent, horrified gasp as if he'd just been told his entire portfolio had vanished. My sister Laura, always the golden child, the one whose mediocrity my success had funded for over a decade, let out a shriek that momentarily cut through the polite murmur of the 1,000-person ballroom, a sound high-pitched and ugly, utterly destroying the illusion of her refined elegance. "You selfish monster! You can't ruin my life!" she wailed, her voice cracking with pure selfish terror, banging her tiny designer clutch against the white linen table so hard a glass of water toppled over. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd finally achieved the impossible, cutting the annoying, inconvenient source of their luxurious lives out of the picture without suffering any consequence whatsoever. They truly believed I was such a desperate, pathetic fool for their approval that I would never enforce the legal framework I had so meticulously constructed. But they had messed with the wrong daughter. The one who had spent her life internalizing their cruelty and turning it into quantifiable, cold-blooded financial power, and I was about to get the last laugh, not just figuratively, but with millions of dollars in real estate liquidating their entire lifestyle. The setting was the annual Beacon Hill Foundation Gala, held in the cavernous Art Deco grandeur of a historic Chicago hotel ballroom, a glittering night where the city's elite gathered to pledge millions for inner-city educational programs, and where I, Evelyn Hayes, was supposed to receive the Philanthropist of the Year award. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. I was being honored for my generosity, a generosity that had been abused and taken for granted by the very people seated 10 feet away. I was impeccable. Of course, a custom-made sapphire column dress that cost more than their mortgage had they had one. My dark hair coiled into a sophisticated, unyielding knot, and a calm expression that belied the perfectly controlled storm raging inside. I had flown in from my New York apartment for this, not for the cheap validation, but because it was the perfect, highly public stage for the final devastating act of this decade-long family drama. My family, Sarah, James, Laura, and my feckless brother Michael, were seated at the neighboring table, prominently placed next to the stage, so they could bask in the reflected glow of my achievements without actually having to acknowledge the effort involved. They hadn't spared me a single genuine glance all evening. They'd spent the entire cocktail hour actively throwing shade, maneuvering their conversation partners to ensure their voices carried. James loudly discussed his recent investment diversification, a lie. He managed nothing of his own, while Sarah, with faux concern, mentioned Laura's upcoming exclusive wedding in Napa Valley, lamenting that I probably wouldn't make it being so busy with that New York rat race. Laura herself was gushing about the sheer impossibility of booking the perfect vineyard venue, the very vineyard I had secretly purchased 2 years ago as a shrewd commercial investment and then leased back to the management company completely under their radar. Michael, ever the charlatan, was holding court about his groundbreaking new startup, a vaguely crypto-adjacent idea he called decentralized leisure, which was actually just a terrible dating app I had injected seed money into years ago, purely to keep him quiet and ensure he didn't embarrass the family further by demanding a loan from Dad's non-existent funds. Every single conversation was a thinly veiled boast designed to remind me that while I might have the money and the awards, they had the real family bond, the intimate sacred connection from which I was perpetually excluded. The cruelty had reached its predictable venomous peak minutes before my award was scheduled to be announced. Laura flushed with a third glass of Veuve Clicquot, and the certainty of her own superiority, leaned across the table toward a major Chicago donor, Mr. Henderson, a man whose opinion James desperately sought. "You know, Evelyn is so dedicated to her career, which is truly admirable," she said, her voice cloyingly sweet, but amplified by the microphone-like echo of the massive hall loud enough to carry to my table. "But it's such a shame she never had time for family. We practically had to drag her here from the city. Honestly, we worry about her being so isolated, so driven. It's not a very feminine lifestyle, is it?" Henderson, sensing the familial toxicity, had just offered a non-committal polite nod, but the poison had landed. I felt the familiar sharp sting of unfairness, but this time it was different. This time the wound was deliberate, public, and delivered right before my triumphant moment. It wasn't just exclusion, it was a character assassination attempt designed to delegitimize my success by framing it as a symptom of personal failure and emotional void. I calmly took a slow, measured sip of water, my gaze meeting Laura's over the rim of the glass. Her smirk was pure, unadulterated self-satisfaction. She thought she was diminishing me, proving her superior value as a family woman. Then came the text. It wasn't just Sarah's doing. It was a coordinated collective group message from all four of them: James, Sarah, Laura, and Michael, a shared unanimous execution notice, perfectly timed. They'd clearly planned it to hit right before I went on stage, hoping to shatter my composure, force me into an emotional retreat, and solidify their narrative of my unfitness for family life. The title of the group chat was simply "Final Decision." James, Evelyn, this lifestyle gap is too much. You don't fit here anymore. Your success just makes the rest of us feel inadequate. It's time for you to go your own way. We need a simpler, more connected family. Sarah, we love you, darling, but you're too driven. You don't prioritize us. We've all decided you need space. Permanent space. It's frankly exhausting having to manage your presence at family events. Laura, don't bother coming to the Napa wedding. It would be awkward for my friends. We are revising the guest list to be immediate family only, and we decided that you just don't count anymore. Michael, it's for the best, sis. We don't want your money. We want a real family vibe. The emotional cost of your success is too high for us. No ties ever. It was a total fabrication, of course. They didn't just want my money. They needed it to sustain the illusion of wealth they were living. That was the central bitter irony of our relationship. I was the one they ostracized, the one they constantly told was too much, or not soft enough. Yet I was the only reason they weren't struggling in a cramped two-bedroom suburban hell. I was a senior partner at the largest, most aggressive private equity firm in New York, a self-made woman who had bought them their entire lifestyle, from the luxury SUVs they traded in every 2 years to the private school tuition for Laura's kids, down to the premium health insurance. And yes, the villas, all 4 of them. One chic vacation condo in Miami's South Beach, one expansive desert retreat in Scottsdale, Arizona, one cozy rustic cabin near Lake Tahoe, and the primary residence, a sprawling 5-bedroom estate in a gated community in suburban Dallas, which they affectionately and arrogantly referred to as the homestead. I lowered my phone. The initial flash of hurt instantly extinguished by a sense of icy, perfect calm washing over me. The pain was dull now, replaced by a crystalline clarity, the kind of focus I used when valuing a billion-dollar distressed asset. This was the moment I had been planning for, the moment I knew their innate self-destructive cruelty would finally cross the line. And they had just handed me the perfectly timed, legally irrefutable excuse to execute my nuclear option. I lifted my phone again, my thumbs moving rapidly across the glass screen. I didn't bother using the group chat for my counterstrike. I texted each of them individually to ensure they felt the personal impact of their loss, starting with my mother, the one who always claimed to be the emotional core. To Sarah, Mom, fine, reversing all deeds of conditional gift and terminating all occupancy agreements. You have 7 days precisely to arrange movers and vacate the Dallas property. The deed for the Miami villa reverts to the original managing LLC immediately. Have fun explaining to your book club why you're suddenly moving out of the homestead. To James, Dad understood. The Scottsdale property is being listed by my broker tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Central. All accounts associated with the property are frozen. Your standing authorization for a quarterly trust fund withdrawal, the one I set up for emergency medical expenses, is revoked effective now. That money was for the future. You just chose to cancel it. To Laura, sister, good luck finding a new Napa venue on such short notice. I own the vineyard you booked through the Shell Corporation. I've instructed the manager to cancel your reservation and transfer the deposit to my charitable foundation. And the Lake Tahoe villa deed is revoked. That's $1.4 million gone. Enjoy the awkwardness of a stripped-down wedding. To Michael, brother, your startup funding has been pulled. Effective 12:01 a.m. tomorrow. The license agreement for your core technology is terminated due to breach of conduct. All intellectual property rights revert to me at midnight, including all the cat video algorithms. Have fun explaining to your 2 employees that the bank accounts are empty and the bankruptcy papers are coming. The final text was the neat, concise summary I sent to the Final Decision group chat, a devastating closure that hit all 4 of them simultaneously. My reply to Final Decision. Fine, repossessing the 4 villas I bought for you, total value $6.2 million. All assets are reverting to the sole managing member. Congratulations on finally getting the space you wanted. It's financially permanent. The effect was instantaneous, physical, and sublime. The shock of the text hit them like a physical blow, a multi-ton freight train of reality smashing into their fragile bubble of denial. James's jaw went slack, his face losing all trace of the confident pink color it usually held, turning a sickly mottled gray. Sarah's eyes, usually sharp and perpetually critical, became wide and wet, track-lighting straight to me. She started to mouth something, maybe Evelyn, wait, but the words caught in her throat, the realization of what she had done paralyzing her. The smug superiority they had worn all evening and the condescension, the arrogant sense of entitlement, it evaporated, replaced by raw, paralyzing fear, a collective sense of profound, self-inflicted damage. They had genuinely believed I was the cash cow they could milk, treat like garbage, and keep forever. They had mistaken my controlled silence and years of patience for weakness and desperation. They had failed to realize that the most successful people in finance are rarely emotional, and when they are, the emotional fuel is used to drive meticulous long-term planning. Just then, the master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, his voice booming across the hall. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our philanthropist of the year, the exceptionally generous and fiercely intelligent Miss Evelyn Hayes, a true visionary in corporate social responsibility. I stood smoothing the folds of my sapphire gown, every motion measured and calm. I didn't look directly at my family, though I could feel their desperate, burning stares, a mixture of panic, rage, and sudden cold comprehension. I walked toward the stage, my designer heels clicking confidently on the polished marble floor. But as I passed their table, Mom Sarah lunged, grabbing my wrist with a surprising, frantic grip. Her grip was tight, desperate, and utterly selfish. "Evelyn, wait, what are you doing? This is family. First, darling. Please, we didn't mean it. It was just a stupid joke," she sobbed, the tears starting to stream down her face, instantly ruining her expensive foundation and mascara. Her voice was frantic, pathetic, the voice of a spoiled child whose favorite toy had just been snatched away. She wasn't begging for me. She was begging for the house. Laura, who had been screaming and banging the door, begging on the phone to Michael, who was calling in a panic from his own table, now turned her full irrational fury on me. Her voice was shrill and uncontrolled, a sound that made several nearby attendees wince. "You selfish monster! You can't do this! That's my home! You are ruining our lives just because you're angry! How can you be so petty?" I gently but firmly pulled my wrist free from my mother's grasp. My movement was minimal, controlled, conveying a massive amount of power. I leaned down just close enough so only the 4 of them could hear my answer. My voice, a quiet, measured whisper dripping with the sophisticated sarcasm and financial language they had always hated and failed to understand. "Too late," I said, offering them a small professional smile, the kind of smile you give a competitor whose valuation you are about to demolish. "You just executed the termination clause on your own tenancy agreement citing permanent severance of ties. You just disowned the bank effectively. Enjoy the award ceremony. I have a speech to give." That moment changed everything. Stepping onto the stage, accepting the heavy, beautiful glass trophy, and delivering my pre-written speech felt surreal, a final public triumph. I spoke about the importance of independence, the need for clear boundaries, and the true meaning of support, my words now perfectly double-edged, intended for the people sitting in the third row. As I spoke, I watched my family. They weren't clapping, they weren't even listening. They were huddled over their phones, texting furiously, their faces a roadmap of terror, disbelief, and mounting internal panic. They were already strategizing, already realizing the legal and financial abyss they had just plunged themselves into. They had assumed my financial support was a weakness I couldn't undo, a permanent gift born of my desperate desire for their love. They were wrong. I was playing chess while they were playing checkers, and my opening move, a simple text reply, had just checkmated their entire luxury lifestyle. I had an ace up my sleeve, a comprehensive, airtight plan that had been developing for years. A plan that finally had its perfect self-inflicted trigger. Their own monstrous, narcissistic cruelty. My smile for the cameras was genuine now, a cold, hard, triumphant expression. The game had officially begun, and I had the first checkmate. The next morning, I knew what I had to do: execute the rest of the plan with the same surgical precision as my opening text, leaving no room for argument or maneuver. The initial shock had been necessary. It had bought me time and successfully destroyed their ability to form a united, coherent front. They would spend the next week cycling through anger, denial, and pathetic attempts at reconciliation, which gave my legal team, led by my fiercely loyal friend and business partner Jack Peterson, all the time they needed to finalize the legal filings and secure the assets. The whole saga leading up to that horrific text and my swift, brutal response was the culmination of 30 years of being the designated family goat, the scapegoat, the one who was never quite enough. It started subtly, growing like a slow, toxic bloom. I grew up in suburban Dallas, a classic American upbringing, complete with endless summer days, neighborhood potlucks, crowded tailgating sessions before Cowboys games, and a relentless, crippling pressure to achieve, but only when it served the family's image of perfect normalcy. I was the eldest, the quiet, analytical one who preferred reading dense financial books to socializing. Laura was the charming princess, the effortlessly beautiful one who could charm money out of James with a single pout. Michael was the athletic, reckless prince, the one whose failures were always excused as creative development. My parents, Sarah and James, were masters of passive-aggressive favoritism, a subtle, constant drip feed of emotional neglect that was far more damaging than outright cruelty. My entire youth was spent trying desperately to earn a love that was freely and unconditionally given to my siblings. Laura got a brand new cherry red BMW on her 16th birthday. I got a used Honda Civic, a lecture about the value of money, and a list of chores. Michael wrecked his second car in college, a drunken incident that cost thousands in legal fees. Dad just sighed, paid the bill, and bought him a brand new SUV the next day, explaining to me, "Boys will be boys, Evie. You're just built tougher. You understand responsibility." That phrase, "built tougher," was their excuse for every slight, every neglect, every sacrifice they demanded of me. When it came time for college applications, I applied to Harvard and got in with a full academic scholarship. I still remember Sarah's first comment. It wasn't, "I'm proud of you," but "that's wonderful, dear." But think of how stressful it will be for Laura and Michael when their applications go out. Maybe you should just go to the state school, so they don't feel so much pressure. We don't want to divide the family geographically, do we? I didn't listen. I took out minimal loans to cover living expenses, worked 3 grueling jobs throughout college, and graduated top of my class with a degree in economics, ready to conquer the world of high finance, motivated by the cold certainty that I would never depend on them for anything. My siblings, meanwhile, coasted effortlessly through life, buoyed by the family's protective cushion. Laura managed to major in art history at a mediocre private college, dropped out after 2 years, and promptly married a trust fund kid she divorced 2 years later, leaving her with an alimony check that wasn't remotely enough to sustain her luxury habit. She was perpetually demanding, perpetually victimized. Michael, the entrepreneur, was perpetually developing the next big idea: a custom pet food app, a luxury dog walking service, a bespoke tie company. Every single idea inevitably failed, leaving him in five-figure debt and constantly calling home for bailouts, which, since James and Sarah didn't have the money, usually meant a frantic call to me. My real colossal mistake was getting rich too fast, too young. By 30, I was a senior partner at the most aggressive, prestigious private equity firm in New York. I was pulling down multi-million-dollar bonuses, a financial powerhouse living the fast-paced Manhattan life, complete with a beautiful, fully owned apartment overlooking Central Park. I was living the high-octane American dream they pretended to value, but my success only fueled their deep-seated resentment, envy, and most crucially, their dependency. The financial bleed began innocently enough, starting with small, manageable injections. Michael needed a small investment for his first disastrous app. Laura needed help with a down payment on her third condo after the divorce. Then came the big ask, the one that cemented their parasitic relationship, the Dallas homestead. Sarah and James had always wanted that perfect sprawling estate in the exclusive Preston Hollow area. The kind of home that spoke of old Texas money and stability, but they could never afford the taxes, the maintenance, or the mortgage. In 2017, after I closed a particularly massive merger, a 9-figure deal that earned me a record bonus, I decided to do something monumental, a grand, foolish gesture I hoped would finally buy me a shred of unconditional acceptance and quiet their constant demands. I bought the house title in my name and told them they could live there rent-free, effectively giving them the lifestyle they craved. It was my gift of peace. The final price tag, including extensive renovations and landscaping, was $2.1 million. I'd even told James he could manage the property taxes and HOA fees out of the emergency fund I set up for him. The gifts didn't stop there. They escalated with their consumption and my increasing wealth. The Miami Villa, a modern condo in South Beach for Laura's year-round seasonal depression. Vacations, $1.4 million, the Scottsdale retreat, a Spanish-style house for James's relentless golf trips, and Sarah's desert escape, $1.3 million, and the Lake Tahoe cabin, a remote, beautiful place Michael used to write his business plans, and host parties, $1.4 million. Total investment tied up in 4 non-revenue-generating properties for my family, $6.2 million. Critically, every single deed and occupancy agreement was meticulously structured. This was my area of expertise after all. I didn't buy the properties and simply sign them over. That would be a financial and legal nightmare of gift tax and lost control. Instead, I bought them through a series of complex single-purpose LLCs, specifically designed for asset protection and, more importantly, control. I was the sole managing member and majority shareholder of all 4 LLCs. The family members, Sarah, James, Laura, and Michael, were listed merely as tenants or managers of the respective properties with conditional rights of residency tied to continuous good family standing and financial oversight from the LLC. The moment they ceased to be good family, the tenancy agreement had a severe ironclad clause that allowed for immediate termination of their management roles and the reversion of all residency rights. It was a brilliant, financially complex cage designed to incentivize them to treat me with the respect due to their benefactor. And they had just with their own cruel hands hit the release button. My closest confidant and the architect of the ultimate plan was Jack Peterson. Jack was my business partner, a corporate litigation shark who looked perpetually tired, but whose brain operated at warp speed, and the only person outside of my firm who knew the full toxic extent of my family's emotional and financial vampirism. We met at Harvard Law and had been inseparable business allies ever since. He was the one who, over a few too many happy hour martinis at a chic NYC rooftop bar, had helped me draft the initial complex LLC documents for the properties years ago, joking that they were my nuclear family deterrent, complete with non-negotiable clauses. "You keep throwing money at a black hole, Evie," he'd warned me, then stirring his drink, the city lights glittering behind him. "One day they'll chew off your arm and then sue you for the elbow grease. Make sure you have leverage. Make sure they know who's really in charge, and make sure that leverage is legally enforced by a document they signed." I had followed his advice to the letter, building a fortress around my assets, making sure the rules were clear, even if they chose to ignore them. In the operating agreement for the Dallas Properties LLC, the clause 14B was explicit. Any attempt by the managers or tenants to publicly or privately sever the familial relationship with the sole managing member shall be construed as hostile breach of this covenant, immediately triggering termination of all management roles and occupancy rights without right of appeal. James himself had signed it, barely skimming the pages, only focused on the address and the square footage. The ultimate catalyst for the current final rupture happened 6 months ago. James was hospitalized in Dallas for a minor elective procedure. I flew straight from a crucial closing meeting in London to Dallas, expecting the usual dramatic chaos. But instead I walked into an argument in the hospital waiting room. Michael was loud on the phone, arguing vehemently with a lawyer he had found on Google. Laura was huddled with Sarah, whispering fiercely, their heads close together. I hung back, grabbed a terrible cup of Starbucks coffee from the lower level, and sat out of sight behind a privacy screen, pretending to scroll through market data. "I don't care, Michael. Make sure she's completely out. We have to finalize this before Dad leaves the hospital." Laura hissed, her voice sharp with panic. "If she has any claim to Dad's contingent trust distribution, or God forbid gets listed as executor, we are ruined. She'll find out about the loan we took out against the Miami condo." Michael countered, his voice sounding thin and stressed. "I told you the lawyer says her name has to be purged from the contingent beneficiaries list for James's secondary life insurance policy, just to be safe. We can't risk her getting James's life insurance payout. She already has too much money. She doesn't need it. That money is for us, for Laura's kids, for my next round of funding." Sarah chimed in, her voice low, controlled, and chillingly venomous. "And that's why we need to make sure she stays the isolated one. Keep her busy with her New York nonsense. We need to cut the cord now, legally and emotionally, so there's no confusion in the will. Just a clean break. The sooner we alienate her, the less grounds she has to contest anything. Just keep taking the gifts until the document is signed." My hands shook, nearly spilling the lukewarm, bitter coffee onto my expensive silk trousers. This wasn't just about an inheritance. James's actual estate was negligible, mostly tied up in a life insurance policy that was structured in a way that protected Sarah. This was about their deep, ingrained psychological need to exclude me, to render me invisible, worthless, and finally legally irrelevant. After everything I had done, the millions I had given, the years I had sacrificed, they weren't just taking my money. They were actively trying to erase me from the legal and emotional landscape of the family, viewing me as a permanent liability to their own entitlement and victim narrative. That moment, hearing them discuss my emotional and financial excision with such cold, brutal calculation, was the moment the scale tipped irrevocably from hurt to surgical absolute fury. It was the moment I stopped hoping for their love and started craving justice. I didn't confront them then. I smiled, asked how Dad's procedure went, and acted the perfectly devoted, tired daughter for the rest of the visit, feigning ignorance of their plot. But on the first-class flight back to New York, staring out at the clouds over the American heartland, I was no longer Evelyn, the long-suffering daughter. I was Evelyn Hayes, the cold, brilliant financier and legal strategist. I called Jack the moment my plane touched down at JFK. "It's time to activate the nuclear deterrent," I told him, my voice devoid of the usual weariness. Jack, who had been waiting for this call for 5 years, responded instantly without needing context. "The Good Family Standing Clause, breach of covenant, 14B, what's the official trigger you need?" Public recorded evidence of intent to permanently sever familial ties leading to documented emotional distress. I said the plan already forming with the precision of a corporate takeover bid. I need the paperwork ready, signed, sealed, and ready to serve for all 4 properties. I want the repossession swift, indisputable, and devastating. I want security personnel and process servers at all 4 properties simultaneously seizing control before they even have time to call a lawyer. They made their choice. You got it, Evie. We'll use the text message as the definitive trigger. The emotional distress comes from the public humiliation at the gala. We'll cite hostile environment and irreparable breakdown of fiduciary trust as the breach of contract. Their text will be gold in court. It's an open and shut case, legally speaking. They self-sabotaged. For the next 6 months, I meticulously laid the trap, a slow, patient hunter. I arranged for the gala, accepting the award only because it guaranteed their attendance and their desire to bask in my reflected glory. I calculated that their arrogance was their undoing. They saw me as a wallet with legs, a resource, not a human being. I calculated that they would try one last public humiliation to reinforce their superiority and justify their impending legal purge. The text message was my perfect, legally irrefutable, self-inflicted trigger. The day after the gala, I was back in my New York office, a sleek, open-plan space overlooking the city, my energies sharp and focused. I hadn't slept, but I felt more alive and centered than I had in years. Jack was across from me, a stack of folders on his mahogany desk labeled Homestead LLC, Beachfront LLC, Desert LLC, and Cabin LLC. "Morning, Mrs. Vengeance," he said, a weary but appreciative grin stretching across his face as he poured me an espresso. "Don't call me that, Jack," I said, taking the cup, a small cold smile on my face. "I'm just correcting a severe financial imbalance and enforcing a signed legal contract." "How are the serving documents holding up?" "Airtight," he confirmed, tapping the folders. "We've got 4 separate LLC repossession notices, 1 for each property, all citing the same breach of the Covenant of Good Family Conduct clause you so cleverly inserted. We have signed affidavits from the gala attendees who overheard Laura's comments about you. And we have their full group text thread, preserved, time-stamped, and notarized, proving their explicit, unanimous intent to permanently sever ties. Under the specific terms of the LLC operating agreements, their tenancy and all managerial agreements are terminated immediately. We just need to execute the transfer of control. We hit the button, Evie." "Hit the button!" I commanded, my voice flat, firm, and final. "I want process servers and armed security at all 4 locations by 3 p.m. Central Time today. I want them to have 0 time to pack, 0 time to call a lawyer, and 0 time to strategize." They asked for space. I'm giving them the entire continent and the crushing weight of reality. The next few hours were filled with high-stakes financial coordination and the rising tide of panicked calls from Dallas, Scottsdale, and Tahoe. Sarah called first, naturally sobbing hysterically into the phone. I let the receptionist transfer her straight to my specialized legal team's voicemail, a recording of Jack's cool corporate voice informing her all communication must now be directed through counsel. Then James tried adopting his most authoritative bullying tone, a tone that had terrified me into compliance for decades. "Evelyn, this is absurd. This is a family matter, not a legal one. You can't legally do this, young lady. Those are our homes. We have occupancy rights. This is emotional blackmail," he bellowed into the phone when he finally bypassed my security and got through to me. I kept my voice low, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion, the kind of voice I used when dismantling a bad merger proposal and telling the CEO his company was worthless. "James, you and Sarah jointly typed, 'We disown you, no ties ever. Stop contacting.'" That text message, which I have notarized and filed as Exhibit A, constitutes a fundamental self-inflicted breach of the occupancy agreement you signed. Paragraph 14, subsection B clearly states that any documented permanent severing of the familial bond initiated by the tenants automatically triggers the lease termination. You have until 4 p.m. Friday to remove all essential personal items from the Dallas address. Security will be changing the locks on the Miami and Scottsdale villas at 5 p.m. today. The assets are reverting to the sole managing member. That's me. You messed with the wrong daughter, James. You chose money and entitlement over me, and now you have neither. His silence on the line was the most satisfying sound I had heard in 35 years. The sound of a man realizing his decades-long con was over. But where are we supposed to go? We don't have any other property. You know that, he finally stammered. The patriarch dissolved into a whimpering, financially insecure child. I suggest a nice extended stay motel near the airport, I said, my tone clinical. You have plenty of my money saved up, I'm sure, from all the cash gifts I've sent over the years. Or perhaps you can ask Laura and Michael. They seem so keen on supporting the family unit now that it's convenient. He hung up before he could articulate another pathetic defense. The sheer breathtaking level of their entitlement was staggering. They had taken $6.2 million in free housing, not to mention countless smaller gifts vehicles and direct cash infusions, and still had the audacity to try and legally cut me out of their lives while maintaining the entire luxury lifestyle I funded. My revenge wasn't just about the money. It was about forcing them to face the immediate existential consequences of their emotional bankruptcy, to feel the cold, hard logic of the financial world they had always relied upon and despised. Laura's call was next. She didn't cry. She went straight to threats, manipulation, and self-pity, her voice hysterical. You are destroying my wedding, Evelyn, the Napa Vineyard. That was the only place available. You know how much this means to me. I'm your sister. What about family values? This is un-American, this level of greed. Un-American, Laura. Trying to steal an inheritance from the person who paid your rent for 8 years is pretty un-American, actually. It's also illegal, which is why I'm addressing it through the proper channels, I said, injecting a subtle mocking emphasis on the word illegal. And you're right, I did buy the vineyard. I acquired it as an investment when you were complaining about the venue fees. I've already instructed the manager to cancel your reservation and refund your deposit, which will give you a little moving money. I'll be hosting a benefit for an actual charity there next month, one that supports children's literacy. You're welcome to send a gift. Now, about that Lake Tahoe cabin, you should probably start packing your overpriced ski gear. The security team will be there shortly. The conversation ended with her screaming so loudly about unconditional love and, betrayal, that Jack actually put his hands over his ears and shook his head in pity. My history with my family was a crushing, predictable pattern of me sacrificing and them consuming, a constant zero-sum game. When I was 25, just starting my career trajectory on Wall Street, I postponed a year of my master's degree to fly home and managed James's failing industrial supply business while he recovered from a devastating, self-inflicted bad investment. I cleaned up the books, sold off the deadweight, stabilized the company, and effectively saved their entire retirement. What did I get in return? Sarah introduced me at a Christmas party as Evelyn, the one who does numbers. Such a shame she can't find a nice husband or settle down. But we are so proud of Laura for her beautiful marriage. 4 years ago, when Laura needed a kidney donor's screening for a sudden terrifying health scare, a crisis that thankfully didn't require a transplant, I dropped everything, flew to the Mayo Clinic, and went through the painful, invasive preparatory tests ready to give my organ to the sister who despised me, Laura. She spent the entire time complaining that the hospital Wi-Fi was slow, that the vegan food was disgusting, and that I was drawing too much attention from the nurses by asking so many technical questions. I came away from that experience not with family solidarity, but with a deeper, visceral understanding of their bottomless emotional black hole. They would take my literal organ and still complain about the surgical scar. My commitment to this revenge wasn't rash. It was the final, logical, and inevitable step in my journey of self-preservation and reclamation. I had always been seeking their approval, effectively trying to buy their affection with real estate and cash. Now I was buying back my freedom and peace of mind with the exact same assets. The transaction was complete, and the cost was their comfort. Jack and I spent the rest of the afternoon monitoring the process servers. The photos and signed receipts started rolling in detailing the successful seizure of assets. The best one was from the Dallas homestead. The server, a burly, unflappable man named Stan, caught Michael on camera, shirtless, arguing vehemently and throwing a soda can as he was handed the official repossession papers. The timestamp read 3:02 p.m. Central. Looks like Michael will be spending his afternoon searching for a new IP attorney in addition to a new address. Jack chuckled, leaning back in his chair, feeling the professional satisfaction of a perfectly executed hostile takeover. He just realized his entire startup was a revocable license agreement dependent on Evelyn Hayes, the managing member, not Michael Hayes, the visionary. He wanted no ties ever, I reminded Jack, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. I merely delivered the terms of their own declaration. It's all very neat, very clean. No messy emotions, just contracts and consequences. The emotional toll of this long-term abuse had led me to redefine my life and my success. I had spent years in intensive therapy learning that my almost maniacal drive for professional success was deeply tied to an attempt to prove my worth to my emotionally abusive parents and siblings. The wealth wasn't just money, it was my shield, my armor, and my bargaining chip. The villas weren't just investments. They were gilded cages I had given to my family, hoping they would be grateful enough to finally let me into their inner circle. The moment they locked me out with their text, I simply retracted the key, the money, and my life. My plan wasn't just about taking the properties back. It was about leveraging the public embarrassment and the legal certainty of my position to gain permanent, unassailable freedom. They would attempt legal recourse, of course. James called later that evening, his voice tight with false confidence, having clearly just spoken to a desperate local attorney. "I'm ahead of you, James," I cut in calm as ice. "When I structured the LLCs, every asset transfer was treated as a lease-to-own agreement contingent on performance criteria, specifically good family conduct and non-hostility towards the managing member. The initial gift tax liability was intentionally low paid by the LLC, not you, because the asset remained under the LLC's control. The IRS filings are complex but absolutely sound. You signed the management contract that outlines immediate, non-appealable termination upon breach. Your lawyers will confirm this by morning. You have no claim, only a very large impending moving bill and a serious lack of funds." I heard Sarah weeping loudly in the background, a high-pitched, self-pitying sound that years ago would have instantly broken me and sent me rushing to comfort her. Now it was just the sound of a broken engine, irritating but easily ignored. "We disown you, Mom and Dad," I whispered into the phone, using their exact words weaponized. "I accepted the terms. Now you accept mine. Good night." The days that followed were a blur of legal finalizations. The repossession was official. The Dallas mansion was legally mine again. The keys secured, the alarm codes changed. The 3 other properties, Miami, Scottsdale, Tahoe, were immediately put into a special asset management pool, ready to be liquidated swiftly. I instructed my asset managers to sell them aggressively, slightly below market value, just to rub salt in the wound and ensure a fast closing. I needed the cash converted quickly from illiquid real estate into cold, hard liquid capital, ready for my next greatest venture. My true goal, the part of the plan that would finally complete my journey of self-reclamation, was launching my own investment firm. For years, I had been the silent workhorse for my private equity partners, funding my family's lifestyle and putting my real passion on hold, ethical, high-impact venture capital. Now, with $6.2 million in liquidated assets, plus my considerable personal fortune and reputation, I was launching Astra Ventures, a boutique investment firm dedicated exclusively to funding and mentoring women-led startups in the tech and green energy sectors. This wasn't just revenge, it was the creation of a legacy of genuine positive impact. Jack and I finalized the Astra Ventures launch documents in my apartment one rainy Saturday in New York, surrounded by empty takeout containers and whiteboards covered in flowcharts and financial projections. "This is phenomenal, Evie," Jack said, reviewing the initial pitch deck. "You're not just walking away from the toxicity, you're building an empire out of the wreckage. That $6.2 million in found money is the perfect launch capital, giving you a huge minority stake in the first two funds and ensuring absolute independence from outside investors for the first 18 months. It's not just capital, Jack. It's symbolic." I insisted, tapping a pen against the LLC file folder. "It's the cost of my emotional freedom paid for by the ones who oppressed me. They think I'm the selfish monster, but all I did was reclaim my own property and invest it into a future of actual deserved success." The media storm, while contained to local Dallas and Manhattan society circles, was brutal for the Hayes family. The news that a prominent Chicago socialite family had been evicted from multiple multi-million-dollar properties by their own daughter, a well-known financier, was too juicy for the gossip columns to ignore. Local papers hinted at a devastating family feud fueled by greed. This was the second critical part of the genius revenge destroying their social standing, which they valued more than any house. Their attempts to explain themselves were pathetic. Laura tried to post a cryptic victim-blaming message on Instagram about the coldness of corporate hearts, only to be immediately called out by several of my loyal friends in the comment section who knew the truth and weren't afraid to spill the tea. One of those friends was Emma Sinclair, a successful investigative journalist I'd known since college, who was now working for a major online publication. Emma had been horrified by the family's abuse and had been my silent ally. She posted a link to an anonymous blog she had set up detailing some of the family's past financial demands, the history of neglect, and the specifics of the recent $6.2 million in property gifts, citing my extensive philanthropic efforts as the only true source of their recent lavish lifestyle. The article was titled, "The Price of Entitlement, a $6.2 million wake-up call." The damage was instant and irreparable. The Hayes name, once associated with quiet Dallas prosperity, was now a byword for greed, ingratitude, and colossal self-inflicted financial ruin. Their social network instantly evaporated. Michael tried a last-ditch, desperate effort showing up at my New York office unannounced 2 weeks after the eviction. He somehow managed to slip past the initial security demanding to see me. I was ready. I met him in the large glass-walled conference room, my gaze unwavering, my posture perfectly relaxed. He looked truly haggard, his usually smooth, entitled face etched with panic, his designer shirt wrinkled. "Evie, we need to talk. We need to reset this. Mom is literally on heavy tranquilizers and Dad is calling his attorney every 5 minutes. But the lawyer keeps laughing at him. I don't understand this. You're the smart one. You're supposed to fix things for the family." "I am fixing things, Michael," I said softly, sitting across the vast marble table from him, my fingers laced together. "I'm fixing my life and establishing healthy boundaries. And your mother needs a good therapist, Michael, not tranquilizers." "But the app, my IP, you can't take my IP, that's my life's work. The decentralized leisure platform, it was about to break through." "Your life's work was 3 months of amateur coding and 5 years of burning through my seed money. The agreement states, Michael, that upon the termination of the management LLC, all associated IP created under that umbrella reverts immediately to the managing member, which is me. I'm selling the entire code base and the user data to a competitor for a nominal sum. You should have read the fine print, Mike. That's what I kept telling you when you were so busy developing your vision." I paused, allowing the brutal truth to sink in. "Your life's work is worth exactly the value of the liquidated code, which frankly isn't much." He finally broke down, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. "Please, Evie, we're family. We love you. Mom always says family first." "Oh, she says family first now, does she?" I raised an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly. "She said, and I quote, 'We disown you, no ties ever.' That was your family's final decision, Michael." I simply accepted your terms and enforced the consequences outlined in the contract you willingly breached. You and Laura are grown adults who have spent your lives consuming my success, my emotional energy, and my money, while offering me nothing but contempt and exclusion. You wanted me gone. I'm gone. The $6.2 million was the fee for my departure, and now it's going into something genuinely productive. I stood signaling the end of the meeting, pressing the discreet button on my desk that alerted security. I'm having security escort you out, Michael. Don't contact me again. I'm building a new family, a professional family, one based on respect, competence, and honesty, not blood and betrayal. As he was led away protesting loudly that I was destroying his dream, I felt a deep cleansing wave of peace. The hardest part wasn't taking the money back. The hardest part was finally silencing the little voice inside me that still wanted to be loved by them. That voice was now definitively, gloriously dead. My true journey of self-reclamation had begun, unburdened by the parasitic weight of my past. I was free to be the strong, brilliant, and resilient woman I was always meant to be. The next phase required absolute laser-like focus, launching After Ventures and solidifying my new independent identity. The launch of After Ventures was a triumph. The story of the self-made female financier who reclaimed her wealth from a toxic family and immediately invested it into female-led startups became an instant media narrative, but this time a positive one, focused on empowerment and independence. The scandal was framed as a courageous act of setting boundaries. I moved my operational base to Silicon Valley, establishing a sleek minimalist headquarters in Menlo Park. 2 years later, I stood on the balcony of my new headquarters. After Ventures was a major success. We had funded and accelerated 6 startups, including Solar Bloom, the energy company, and Phoenix Tech, a specialized AI firm. Both were already showing signs of massive growth and were well on their way to becoming unicorns. My face now graced the cover of Forbes, where I spoke about the ethics of capital and the importance of investing in integrity. "Big day, Evie. We just closed the Series B for Solar Bloom," Jack said, now wearing the title of Chief Operating Officer and General Counsel with pride. He handed me a fresh cup of coffee brewed exactly the way I liked it. "You officially have 2 unicorns under your belt. That $6.2 million seed money turned into $62 million in diversified assets today. Not bad for a selfish monster who couldn't find a husband." I smiled, taking the cup the residual pain finally converted entirely into steel. The emotional bankruptcy of my family had been my greatest financial catalyst. "I ran a background check on the Hayeses," Jack said quietly, his face serious. "Just a formality to ensure the restraining order is still being observed. James is working as a part-time golf course marshal at a public course near their new rented townhome. Sarah is trying to maintain her social image by teaching piano lessons and selling curated vintage items online. Laura is deep into a multi-level marketing scheme, selling essential oils on Instagram, her feed an endless stream of faux inspirational quotes. And Michael is, well, he's still developing an app. It involves blockchain cat videos and now apparently NFTs. They're fine," I said, looking out at the sprawling, innovative landscape of Northern California. "They're stable, employed, and living within their means without relying on me. Normal is exactly what they never wanted to be, and exactly what they now deserve. They are no longer my problem. The only family first I recognize now is the team we built here, and the incredible women we fund." The final confrontation, the true climax of my silent war, came unexpectedly at an outdoor summer event in San Francisco 8 months after the initial eviction. It was the annual Founders Day mixer held at a gorgeous sun-drenched terrace overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a scene of confident, forward-thinking American wealth. As I was mid-conversation with a major venture capitalist, Meister Thompson, discussing a promising solar energy startup, I saw them. Sarah, James, Laura, and Michael. They looked shockingly diminished, almost ghostly. The loss of their primary residence and their $6.2 million safety net had forced them to downsize dramatically, moving into a generic rental townhome in a less desirable Dallas suburb. They were trying desperately to blend into the crowd, wearing clothes that looked slightly too expensive for their current means, a clear sign of financial strain and social insecurity. It turned out they were invited by a distant, oblivious cousin who still assumed the Hayes family was doing well and hadn't heard the full embarrassing truth. They spotted me instantly. Their faces, already tense, drained of color. The smug arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, hungry glint, the look of a starving animal seeing food. They began to move toward me, a unified, pathetic front of people, realizing they had cut off their own air supply and were now seeking a lifeline. "Evelyn, darling, we saw you on the stage. You look amazing," Sarah cried out, attempting her old, sweet maternal voice, but it was strained, high-pitched, and laced with palpable desperation. She lunged forward, reaching out to touch my arm, but I stepped back smoothly, my eyes warning her not to cross the line I had drawn. "Sarah," I acknowledged my voice, cool, measured, and professional, the tone of a CEO addressing an unwanted solicitor. "James, Laura, Michael, I'm quite busy. Did you need something specific?" James stepped forward, trying to recapture his old patriarch authority, but his clothes were slightly ill-fitting and his hands shook a little. "We need to talk privately, Evelyn. This situation has gone on long enough. It's time to let bygones be bygones. We've come all this way to see you. We miss you terribly. Family first, remember." The hypocrisy was breathtaking, the casual arrogance of their entitlement still ringing true even in their desperation. I glanced at Mr. Thompson, the VC I had been speaking with, who was watching the scene unfold with fascinated professional curiosity, sensing the high-stakes drama. I decided to make this final conversation public. It was the only way to truly close the door and enforce the finality of my decision. "Oh, I remember," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "I remember the text message you all sent me at the Chicago Gala telling me I was permanently disowned and to stop contacting you. I remember Laura screaming, 'Selfish monster,' when I accepted your terms. I remember Michael trying to steal my IP after I funded his failure for 5 years. I remember your attorney confirming that yes, the good family conduct clause was breached by your own documented hostile actions." Laura's face was tomato red, her eyes darting nervously toward the onlookers. "That's not fair. We were emotional. It was a mistake. We never thought we thought you'd just ignore it like you always did." She stammered, finally articulating the ugly truth of their manipulation. "You committed a breach of contract and profound emotional abuse, Laura," I countered, my voice rising slightly so the nearby crowd could hear the full, chilling exchange. The 4 properties valued at $6.2 million were structured not as a free gift, but as a financial incentive for decent human behavior. You failed the evaluation. I've liquidated those assets, and they are now the foundation of Astra Ventures, a company dedicated to building success for women who actually deserve it, women who build instead of consume. I took my shot, and I rebuilt my life with the money I reclaimed from your entitlement. Michael, desperate and seeing his last chance at funding disappearing, tried a final sickening plea. "Look, we've learned our lesson. We promise, if you just give us the house back, or even just the money, we can sign a new agreement. We'll be good. We'll apologize publicly. We'll do whatever you want." "An apology is worthless when you're financially and emotionally bankrupt," I stated flatly. "And you don't get a new agreement. I'm done. I took back the properties because you told me you wanted no ties ever. I have given you exactly what you asked for: complete and permanent separation." Sarah started to sob again, louder this time, clutching her husband's arm. "Evelyn, please, your father and we're getting older. We need the stability. We're your parents. This is a family legacy. My parents were people who taught me to work hard and then relentlessly resented me for doing it better than their favorites," I retorted. The residual pain finally converted entirely into steel. My parents were the people who tried to steal my potential inheritance while living in a house I paid for. I owe you nothing but the quiet gratitude of a person who has finally severed a toxic parasitic relationship. I am not financially responsible for your poor decisions or your emotional failures anymore. The scene was pure, unadulterated drama unfolding against the backdrop of glittering San Francisco Bay. Mr. Thompson gave me a single significant nod, clearly recognizing the display of power and boundary setting. If you need further evidence of my permanent decision, James, you should know that the restraining order has been filed and served to your current rental address. I continued dropping the final definitive bombshell. Any further attempt at contact solicitation of funds or attendance at my professional events will be met with immediate legal action and a police report. Consider this your final documented warning. The distance you asked for is now mandated by law. I turned my back on them, not glancing back once. They were left sputtering, weeping, and red-faced in the middle of a major tech mixer, their desperate pleas for money and reconciliation having failed publicly and definitively. They had lost their homes, their financial security, their social standing, and any last faint hope of ever accessing my wealth again. They had achieved exactly the outcome they had planned. Only the roles were reversed, and they were the ones left outside the glass. 2 years later, I stood on the balcony of my new purpose-built headquarters for Astra Ventures in Silicon Valley. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was sleek, modern, and screamed competence. The firm was thriving, having successfully funded and accelerated 6 startups, 3 of which were already showing signs of massive growth, and 2 were valued over $100 million. I was no longer the daughter desperate for approval. I was a respected investor, a mentor, and a powerful ethical force in the American business world. My journey of self-reclamation had been swift and definitive. The moment I executed the revenge, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was carrying, the constant crushing weight of seeking validation. My focus, once fractured by family demands and emotional manipulation, was now singular and relentless. Jack, now my co-founder and legal counsel for Astra, walked up behind me, handing me a fresh cup of coffee. "Big day, Evie. We just closed the Series B for Solar Bloom. You officially have 2 unicorns under your belt. That $6.2 million seed money turned into $62 million in diversified assets today, all of it ethical capital. Not bad for a selfish monster who couldn't find a husband or prioritize family." I smiled, taking the cup. The pain of the past was truly gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable pride. "I ran a background check on the Hayes' last week," Jack said quietly, leaning against the railing, his eyes scanning the valley. "Just a formality to ensure the restraining order is still being observed. James is working as a part-time golf course marshal at a public course near their new rented townhome, occasionally selling used clubs on eBay. Sarah is trying desperately to maintain her faded social image by teaching piano lessons to wealthy clients and selling curated vintage items online. Laura is deep into a failing multi-level marketing scheme, selling essential oils on Instagram, her feed an endless stream of faux inspirational quotes and poorly filtered photos. And Michael is, well, he's still developing an app. It involves blockchain cat videos and now apparently NFTs, and he's asking strangers for seed funding on LinkedIn. They're fine," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "They're stable, employed, and living within their means without relying on me. Normal is exactly what they never wanted to be, and exactly what they now deserve. They are no longer my problem. The only family first I recognize now is the team we built here and the incredible women we fund. That is my legacy." My true family had become Jack and Emma, the journalist who had helped expose the truth. We often met for Sunday brunch at a favorite cafe in Seattle, a ritual of celebration and support. We celebrated my 35th birthday, not with an awkward family reunion, but with a lively, intimate party for all the Astra employees and founders at my new modern home overlooking the Pacific coast, a place completely untainted by the ghosts of my past. The final symbolic moment of closure wasn't a legal document or a final confrontation. It was a physical act. I purchased a classic restored Ford Bronco, a symbol of American independence and freedom, and drove it out onto the legendary Route 66, a road trip I had postponed for years because my family always needed me for something else. I drove east for 2 days, thinking, reflecting, and finally forgiving myself for ever craving their love. But I stopped halfway in Oklahoma City, realizing the road was leading me back to a past I no longer needed to visit emotionally or geographically. I turned the car around facing west towards the setting sun, Silicon Valley, and my new life. I took a deep breath of the clear, crisp Californian air. The $6.2 million was just a number, the cost of their exit. The villas were just houses. The real treasure I had reclaimed was my own self-worth and the power to define my own destiny. They thought they had disowned me. In reality, they had signed the severance package for their own comfortable lives and funded the launch of my billion-dollar empire. I had suffered, yes, but in the end, I won. I stood tall, a self-made woman who had proven that the only person you truly needed to count on was yourself. My future was wide open, blazing with the promise of success, unburdened by the shame and cruelty of the name I left behind. I took my shot and rebuilt my life brick by brick from the wreckage of their betrayal.